in my last year in San Francisco, I think it was my house got broken into the prior, call it like 2.5 years. My house got broken into twice. My car got broken into something like 7 times. At some point, it's just like you're accepting that this is just a part of your sort of day-to-day life. And it's something that I don't have to think about here. Like, there are nonstop, police, that have their presence all over the city, no matter where I am. Anytime that, I've never even had to call 911, but I just know that if I would have to, I just know that there would be immediate, police presence. It would be taken very seriously. The person would be put into custody. And it's just it's crazy to me that we provide this compassion to the criminals. And it turns out what that actually turns into is cruelty for the innocent. And it's just crazy that just continues to be the case. And it's not like it's changing either. It's like San Francisco has been like this now for a decade. And at some point, it's you have at some point accepted there's people that talk about we're going to change this. There's going to be trends toward this. We're starting these political parties. At some point, a decade in, I think you just have to accept this is ultimately what our values are. This is the city that we're trying to ultimately build. And that's just not something that I want to raise a child within. That is not something that I think is appropriate, values. It's not something that we would tolerate in Bulgaria. And so it's crazy to me that we would tolerate it, in what's supposed to be the techno-utopian capital of the world. And so, I think it's partially why I do see, sort of Miami as this alternative vision where it's look, yes, OpenAI and a lot of these AI companies are starting in San Francisco. But when I think about where it has the potential over the next decade, Miami has safety, it has rule of law, it has a willingness to actually build housing, it has a vast influx of VC founders and companies that are growing from this ecosystem and rapidly scaling up. I see those as the much more critical ingredients, more so than where is some of the incumbent technology today. And so while they have us sort of beat for the next couple of years, I'm not sure that they'll necessarily have us beat for the next decade.
Well, speaking about the cities, especially Miami, and seeing a bunch of babies around, and I think you becoming a father recently, I think it's really awakened something in you, most specifically about your strong stance of having more babies. Can we jump into that for a second?
Yeah, it's crazy to me that there even is this sort of moral perversion in San Francisco and sort of broader the United States that believes in anything other than children being the most important thing on the planet. Ultimately, your fundamental job as DNA is to replicate yourself, and as humans, we basically only have one way of sort of doing that. And so, yeah, it's funny, this particular tweet that you're pulling up. I had probably drafted that tweet in my head 5 years earlier. You know what I mean? Where it's I knew exactly the poem that I needed to use, and I knew exactly what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Sort of the day that my first sort of child was born.
Yeah,
it's so funny seeing how small his feet are. Looking at photos, so much bigger now.
I'm going to read it real quick just for those listening.
Go for it.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. Welcome to planet Earth, my son. I have much to tell you. And it's a picture of Delian holding his brand new baby son's foot. That's really cute.
That's also Dylan Thomas, who is an incredible author who died around 40. Very, very good writer.
He's a phenomenal writer. I mean, in some ways, it's just that is so many people obviously talk about this, Elon on down, but just consciousness is such a sort of rare spark to have in the universe, right? Where the first time that the universe is able to turn its eye back on itself and sort of say hello, and our only duty, it feels like in some ways, is to spread that rare spark in a very, very dark universe as widely as possible. And ultimately, children are really the only way sort of doing that. And in some ways, I also you're pulling up a couple tweets that are in reference to your sort of American patriotic duty. I just America is the greatest country on the planet. I love my heritage in Bulgaria. It's somewhere that I always have a connection to, but America fundamentally is the greatest country on the planet. And it feels like one of my most patriotic duties as an American is to make more Americans. I always talk about I want there to be sort of 1 billion, 1 trillion Americans one day spread out through all the universe. And it's in some ways, again, what is amazing about America is it's one of the only basically is the only country that is predicated not off of your ethnicity, genetic background, or anything like that. Is predicated on a set of ideals that to me are universal sort of human truths and human ideals that are the best ideals to be spread throughout the entire sort of universe. I sometimes I've tweeted this a handful of times where part of why I wake up every single day motivated to work on what I work on is I want the primary language spoken on the moon to be English, not Mandarin. And it has nothing to do with those cultures or those languages. It ultimately has to do with the values of the systems that they represent. And we are in a world right now where sort of the percentage of people living under a democracy has only declined over the past decade. We had a sort of 30, 40-year run where it was increasing, and now for the past decade it has only been decreasing. And it feels like in some ways, creating more Americans is the best way to ensure that the language, that's spoken on the moon is English. Like, what better way of beating China as their population is declining right now for the first time in 50
Yeah.
years than to have our population continue to increase? And yet, if you look at all these trends, we're rolling a bunch of them up, how frequently people are getting married, how frequently they're having children, it's all headed in the wrong direction. And so, look, I on a personal level, always really wanted to have children because sort of Bulgarian culture is very pro-family. I grew up with a, family where I was, one of, sort of three, but also all of my, sort of, uncles and aunts all had, sort of lots of kids. And so, ultimately felt like I wanted to do that on a very personal, familial level, but also felt like in some ways it was the, sort of, citizen of the universe and citizen of the United States, duty for me to do so. It's obviously really excited we have our first son. Very much so. Look forward to, hopefully having, sort of many healthy and beautiful children in the future.
Yeah. I just want to kind of walk through this graph real quick too, because this ties in directly to what you were just speaking there. It's a graph of U.S. fertility rates since 1957. It's the number of births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 44. And there was a huge dip prior to 1940. It went way back up, kind of the baby boomer generation, right, up to 1957. And since that point, I mean, it has completely come down. It is drastically lower, like half as much now than it used to be. So, you're not being hyperbolic when you say that, it's an alarming trend. What do you think is really contributing to that? Is it these luxury ideas? Is it other pressures? And then I guess, what do we do about it other than just having more babies? But like, how do we influence our communities and spheres of influence to kind of adopt, what you're calling a patriotic duty to make more Americans?